Hello and welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give it a few minutes while everyone's joining. So if you'll just bear with us for a minute or two, we'll wait while everyone gets in place before we make a start. It's great to see so many of you joining. Hope everyone's well. Okay, should we just give it another 30 seconds or so and then we'll start. Glad to hear it, Karen. Okay then, I think we'll make a start now. So good afternoon and good morning perhaps, depending on where in the world you're joining us from today. Welcome to our first webinar of 2022, which is entitled Our Patrons Are Not Little Librarians. During the session, we'll be discussing the digital knowledge gap that exists between librarians and patrons, and we're also going to discuss how we can bridge the gap by bringing the library into the academic life of the user. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to my colleagues who will be presenting today. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Janina van der Vesthuizen. I hope, Janina, that pronunciation was okay. Janina is great, thank you. Janina is Manager of Technical Services at the University of Johannesburg, who we've been working with for some time now. So we're delighted she's here today. And I'd also like to welcome Anna Russo, who is a Development Manager at Lean Library. So thanks, Anna. And I'm Nicola Langford, Head of Development for the International Markets at Lean Library too. So if we could just move on to the next slide. Quickly give you an overview of our agenda for today. So we're going to start with Anna, who's going to explore some of the key findings from our recent Librarian Futures report. So Anna will be able to tell you all about that, share some of the insights, and then we'll hand over to Janina, who's going to talk about why patrons aren't little librarians. And then we'll move on to me and I'll show you how the University of Johannesburg have increased discoverability of their library resources by meeting patrons in their workflow through an integration with Lean Library Access. So there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, but we'll also be monitoring the questions in the chat as we go through the webinar. But if you don't pick them up, if I don't pick them up as we're going through, then we'll definitely address them in the end in the Q&A. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to Anna.
Thanks, Nicola. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to meet you all, albeit virtually, and thank you very much for joining us here today. So to kick us off, I'm going to run you through some highlights from the white paper that Lean Library published in November last year, just to give some context to today's presentation and discussion with the University of Johannesburg. So the Librarian Futures report is based on a survey of 4,000 librarians and patrons, which we spoke to across 1,500 institutions worldwide. The research for our report is also supported through interviews with librarians and key stakeholders, as well as contributions from partners such as SpringShare, Site, and OCLC. We also brought in valuable data on user workflows, and additionally, we conducted student studies and surveys in conjunction with Pearson College here in the UK. So the intention of the report really was to focus on the librarian and patron relationship in this hybrid remote learning world that we're currently in, and also to look at how that relationship might look in future as more and more of that engagement between librarian and patron occurs online and off campus. So this report can be downloaded at the link that you see at the bottom of your screen here, www.librarianfutures.com. It's completely free of charge. It's a fantastic read. And additionally, for every download, Sage is donating $1 to ComputerAid to provide universities with equipment and training to improve digital skills. So not only a good read for you, but you'd also be supporting a great cause. Now, the Librarian Futures report covers lots of fascinating topics and really thought-provoking findings. But for the purpose of today's webinar and discussion, I just want to highlight one particular finding around the topic of user centricity. So one of the most striking findings that came out of our research and that we published in our white paper is that the modern patron workflow begins outside of the library for most part. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you, or it might not surprise you at all. But just to back up that statement with some data, we found that 79% of faculty and 74% of students actually begin their research journey outside of the library on open web tools like Google Scholar, Wikipedia, PubMed, Web of Science, Scopus, the list goes on and on. I found that statistic particularly interesting myself. I would have personally expected that students are more likely to begin their research outside of the library, but it is actually faculty that are more prone to do so. And then digging a little bit deeper and looking at that data a little bit further, we also identified that almost 50% of discovery journeys begin on Google Scholar, as you can see on the right-hand side here of this slide. So we know as well that any workflow that takes place outside of the library, off campus, and a workflow that's not necessarily going through the library's preferred tools can often be quite a painful experience for users. So we call this the many-click nightmare, and this is an illustration, a powerful illustration we use of the time-consuming and cumbersome process of using a system that's predicated on either being on campus or using the library's preferred workflow. So you can see here, as an example, the student might start on Google Scholar. They'll be bounced back and forth between different publisher websites. They might come up against a paywall. They might have to log in with their university credentials until they finally get to downloading the PDF, finding the PDF, and getting the PDF on their desktop. So we've tested this out ourselves a couple of times, and we found that on average, it takes 12 clicks and almost 4 minutes to access content outside the library. And often we find that libraries will use legacy systems for access and holdings information that, as I mentioned before, are contingent on users going to the library and libraries being the end destination. So as a result of that, when users aren't doing that, when they're not using a library's preferred workflow, their research journey can be chaotic and clumsy and pretty much the opposite of user-centric, which is the whole theme of today's webinar. And you can see that illustrated in this visual on the left-hand side here. This statement was also supported by a couple of comments that we got from students when we did our research, and we've highlighted 2 quotes here. So the first student noted that their academy wasn't actually focusing on the kind of customer experience that they were used to outside of academia. And another commentator suggested that the modern user is accustomed to point of need information. So that means getting the information that they need when they need it and where they need it, rather than having to leave their workflow to find that information. So these pain points that we identified and found through our research for the Librarian Futures report really emphasize the lack of awareness of the full extent of libraries' support and services. So for example, when we asked students what sources of information they use most, we found that librarians actually tied pretty much with Wikipedia, as you can see here on the left-hand side. So Wikipedia is used 16% of the time, and the librarians inch forward with 1% more than Wikipedia. And on a related note, when we asked students how often they use their librarian, we asked this question to students globally, but in the UK, we found that a large number of students never use their librarian or deem their librarian to not be relevant to them. However, it's not all doom and gloom. We did some further digging, and when we proposed possible solutions and innovations to patrons, specifically around the idea of bringing the library to them rather than them having to go to the library, we got some really positive responses and feedback. So the question was, what if we could bring your librarian support to you in your workflow at your point of need? And as you can see from the percentages here, the feedback was resoundingly positive. Patrons were 90% in favor of this, which was really great to see, considering that most of them don't refer back to their library. And obviously 96%, so the majority of librarians were very much in favor of this as well. This might not come as too much of a surprise, given that with the pandemic happening for the past 2 years, the importance of patron support has increased, especially in the virtual environment where patrons can't necessarily visit their library the way they used to. So what we can do is we can reconcile that demand for the library being in the patron's workflow and the lack of library use by patrons around that idea of user centricity, which will be kind of a leitmotif through today's webinar. And with that being said, I'm going to hand over to Janina, who's going to talk about the University of Johannesburg's perspective and their experiences of increasing discoverability of their library resources by meeting their patrons at their point of need. Janina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. So as you can see, the title is Our Users Are Not Little Librarians. And when we say that our users are not little librarians, what do we mean? Well, allow me to demonstrate. I did a quick search of images of librarians, and these were the pictures that I found on the first page of my search. After that, I did a search of students or millennials. And again, these are the pictures that are found of students and millennials. You will see that there are vast differences between these two pictures. So that was the visual illustration of my point. However, I think that everybody will be terribly disappointed, or maybe some of you will be relieved if I end my part of the presentation there. So I will be providing a little bit more information on what I'm going to say. So we will be looking at the following, and by doing so, I'm already displaying my tendencies of being a librarian by grouping some of the similar facts together in my presentation. So first of all, I will be looking at librarians. We will be looking at millennials, the information seeking behavior of students, Google and Google Scholar, and in my conclusion, I will try and bring all of these pieces together. So if we look at librarians, and you go and do a search of the characteristics of librarians, you will find the following statements will pop up. And I'm sure that most of us will be able to identify with the majority of these statements, or at least with one or two of these. On average, librarians are very conventional individuals, but it's also fair to say that we do have diverse skills. We are detailed orientated and organized. We don't mind spending time constructing the perfect search phrase or string by using at least 1 or 2 Boolean operators, or to make sure that the items that we have are 100% correctly cataloged, or that the upload that we did in the catalog is 100% right. We're also very persistent. We will help a user find that obscure article published in a journal or in a newspaper 50 years ago. We like working in a structured environment, and we often have a very good general knowledge. We love reading, and I must say that's one of the things whenever I tell people that I'm a librarian, one of the first things they tell me is, oh, so you must like reading. Yes, most of us do like reading. We would like to keep up with trends in technology, and we are also very good researchers. And if you look at the little figure on the left-hand side, that is actually from an article from Peter, and that is to show how our users perceive us and what they think are important skills and aspects for being a librarian. You will see that know-how and kindness, rates highly, as well as communication skills and education. For some or other reason, appealing appearance is not high on the scale. No idea why that is. From the previous slide, I must say I'm very glad to see that we are used a little bit more than Wikipedia. So now if we look at the millennials and you look at the characteristics of millennials, I thought it was important to focus on this generation because especially in our environment, they're already part of the student cohort as well as the staff environment. Most resources mention that they were born between 1980 and 1995. They are tech-based and they grew up in an environment where there were always internet. So they always had access to the internet. Like we all know, they use smartphones and laptop, and they expect technology to work. And maybe it is because that the simplifying user interface of systems such as Apple, Amazon, Google, and others set the new standard for intuitiveness when it comes to technology. This is what they expect to be the norm. Technology has become more user-friendly in their lifetime than any of the previous generations. Social media has transformed the way they communicate and how they relate to others. In their world, everything happens much faster and with less barriers. Another important characteristics that we cannot ignore is their perception of immediacy. For them, now means now, and it does not mean just now. In her study, Nimon and others stated that millennials rely on the internet as a primary source of information, as we just heard. And in higher education, that is a massive concern. She also mentioned in the study that they are not very inclined to validate and reference the resources that they found on the internet. And this leads to problems such as plagiarism. Also, they have no problem using information that is not peer-reviewed or reputable. So if we look at the information-seeking behavior of students. Studies showed that the information-seeking behavior of students differ according to their age, gender, discipline, and context. But those are things that we probably all already know. And a study done by Howlader suggests that undergraduate students' information searching skills are poor. And one of the reasons mentioned is that their lack of skills when it comes to using library information resources and the lack of intuitive information resources, which they prefer and they are used to using. Furthermore, it was mentioned that they do not have the skills to successfully navigate information resources in the library websites, and they have difficulty in finding information resources across platforms and disciplines. In my own study, I posed the question to the focus groups, and these were undergraduate focus groups of the University of Johannesburg. I asked them that if you get an assignment on a topic that you are not familiar with, and you have to start look for information, where do you start? And the reason why I posed this question was to establish what is the go-for resource or go-to resource of information. Of course, as we already heard, there was no surprise then. 99% of them start with Google. So let's look at Google and Google Scholar then. Not surprisingly, Google is the world's most visited website, but I suppose we all knew that. Also, Google was the first big tech company to offer free meals to the employees and to allow them to bring their dogs to work. Now, I know that this has got nothing to do with the topic, but I thought it was a very interesting fact, especially that you can bring your dogs to work. So I kind of snuck it into the presentation. What is also interesting is that 15% of daily searches has never been done before. And also, if you look at Google Scholar, it has about 160 million citations, and it allows you to search across disciplines. And those were one of the things that the students mentioned that they have difficulty with. With Google Scholar, you can access journals, conference papers, academic books, preprints, ETDs, and there's also an overlap between what we have in our library databases. Many describe Google Scholar as a simple tool which provides an excellent avenue to scholarly research, and it helps users to clarify and explore a variety of topics. So how do we fit all these pieces together? If you look at the different role players, first of all, you have the librarians. We are organized, we are structured, we're persistent, and we don't mind spending time to make sure that information is 100% accessible according to our standards, and that we find exactly the right resource or resources for our clients. Now, if we look at our users, the millennials specifically, they are very tech savvy with a great sense of immediacy and an expectation that technology should be fast, intuitive, and easy to use. But they have weak information skills when it comes to library resources. While they have easy access to information, they lack the skills needed to construct, plan, and execute different searches, especially when it comes to different disciplines and platforms. And then Google and Google Scholar provides easy access to information. And we know that we don't need advanced skills to access this information. So how do we pull all of this together and create one big happy family? Enters Lean Library. The beauty of this tool is that our users can continue to work in an environment that they are comfortable with, using tools that speak to their skills, while Lean Library gently and effortlessly guide them towards library resources. So in conclusion, yes, our users are not little librarians. They have different skills, priorities, and a different way of doing things. But the good news is that we don't have to turn them into little librarians, as long as we introduce and encourage them to tools such as Lean Library. Thank you so much, and I'm handing over to Nicola.
Thanks so much, Janina. That was great. It was really good, very interesting. So thank you. And thank you for your kind words about Lean Library. So I'm going to now show you how the University of Johannesburg's implementation of Lean Library Access has enabled the library to meet their patrons in their preferred workflow. I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of an overview of Lean Library. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Lean Library, we were founded in late 2016 in the Netherlands by Johan Tilstra. Johan was a librarian, and he was a librarian with a mission. He wanted to help students and researchers get to the resources that they needed in the quickest and easiest way possible, while still maintaining their privacy and security. Lean Library was acquired by Sage Publishing in late 2018, and we've continued to go from strength to strength, growing, adapting and changing with the library community that we seek to serve. We've never lost sight of Johan's mission though, and the library is always at the heart of everything we do, as are the librarians. So Lean Library Access is all about streamlining access to library services and resources, enhancing discoverability of those services and resources, and ultimately growing usage of the resources and increasing the visibility and impact of the library. Lean Library Access is all about streamlining access to the library services and, wrong one, sorry. Lean Library Access is the most comprehensive access solution of its kind, regardless of where the patron starts their research journey, whether it be Google Scholar, PubMed, or a publisher website. Our browser extension is able to redirect the user to library licensed services and resources. So as Janina says, it's all about immediacy for your patrons. And here, regardless of where we start the journey, we're able to immediately redirect your students to the content that they need. We offer extensive ebook coverage. We streamline access to aggregator sourced content. We have extensive open access coverage and are able to automate patron requests through integrations with interlibrary loans and document delivery services. And we're also able to surface library messages at the point of need. I'll be talking through these key features in a little more depth as we go along. If we could just move to the next slide, Anna, thank you. So here we see Lean Library as an app for the library, an app that sits on the patron's desktop and brings the library into their workflows. Our aim is to support the libraries in the transition from being a destination that the user has to go to, whether that's the physical library or the digital infrastructure. As you know, recent events with the pandemic have meant that users have been not able to visit physical libraries, and so the ability to have this app-like service has been particularly beneficial for many institutions. And so we are looking with Lean Library to become a next generation for the library, where the library is embedded in the life of the user, at the point of need. It's in the user's preferred workflows and enables them to have access to the resources, support and services wherever and whenever they need them. So how do we do this? This is a very brief overview and not an exhaustive list of how we integrate to allow the seamless access from wherever the users start their journey. So we integrate with your library management system, enabling authentication, linking your knowledge base, holdings and link resolver, so that we're able to bring patrons back to the library, back to your licensed domains, ebooks and articles. Now, the University of Johannesburg uses both proxy and open Athens for authentication. This isn't a problem for us. We're able to integrate with both authentication systems. The integrations coexist and enable a seamless experience for the user. So we've now got a little GIF that shows the authentication process at the University of Johannesburg in action. The user starts their search on Google. The extension detects that the library has access to the resource. The user's prompted to authenticate, in this instance by Open Athens. And once the button's clicked, as you can see, it's faster than me. The user is taken to the login page, and once authenticated, if the user remains in the same browser session, then they don't need to authenticate again. It's so speedy, as you can see, that it's managed to do it twice while I've explained it. And so we're now going to show some slides that have screenshots showing the other key feature integrations of Lean Library Access. So in this particular one, you can see how we streamline access to the University of Johannesburg's content by integrating with Google Scholar. The enhanced search enables the University of Johannesburg to set up full text links, which you can see to the right of the search results and above the table of content alert button. That link goes straight through to the discovery layer. As Anna mentioned earlier, and as Janina has mentioned too, research has shown that around 48% of users actually start their journey on Google or Google Scholar. And so this enhancement helps to streamline access. It takes users straight to the library's licensed content on the publisher website and from there to the PDF. As you can see from the pop-up on the right-hand side of the screen, we always highlight that it's the university that's providing this access. So it's always making sure that your patrons are aware that you're there on their shoulder helping them. It's also worth noting with the Google Scholar Enhanced feature that individual users may already have activated the enhanced search facility off their own back, but if they have, our extension recognizes this and it doesn't alter their individual settings, but instead applies the full text links facility to all the users who haven't set it up themselves already. So we're not worrying about overriding anybody's personal settings there. And then in addition to ease of access, Lean Library Access also, oh sorry Anna, can we, I didn't realize, so sorry, we've gone back a slide. So in addition to the access, Lean Library Access also has an integration with Cite. You can see the sidebar at the bottom of the search results. If you're not familiar with Cite, it's a platform that analyzes and classifies citations. It identifies them as supporting, mentioning or contrasting. Patrons can click on the little bar that you can see at the bottom of the screen there, and it expands out and you can see a range of citations at a glance. And through the integration, you can then click on the link and go straight through to Cite for more detailed information on those classifications of the citations. We also offer patrons the option of subscribing to table of contents alerts for their favorite journals. As you can see by the orange button below the full text link, the user just clicks on that alert button. It's then linked through where then linked through and prompted to fill in email addresses, and then we'll just receive an email when new articles are added to the journal. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next example shows how we streamline access to aggregator sourced content. The user searches for JSTOR in this example. The extension identifies that the library subscribes to content from JSTOR. The pop-up appears on the right-hand side. The user clicks get access and is redirected to the institution's subscription for this site. And then as we move on to the next slide, we can see that here the user's actually starting their journey from a publisher site. They've searched for a very specific article. Again, the extension has detected that the article is available in the holdings, and the user, once they click on access article, is redirected. In addition to articles, we can also streamline access to ebooks, whether the user starts the ebook search on a publisher website, as is happening here, or if they start their search on Amazon, for example. We can redirect the user to the library's holdings if that ebook is licensed, and we're actually the only access broker with extensive ebook coverage. If the library doesn't have a subscription to the content required, then the user will, of course, encounter a paywall and possibly be asked to pay for the article. In this instance, we're able to surface legal open access alternatives through the partnerships we have with both Unpaywall and Core. These partnerships mean that we have access to a huge open access repository. With Unpaywall and Core, we're able to search over 30 million articles from 50,000 publishers to find legal open access alternatives. So again, always making sure that the oh, what is that? There's a message there, sorry. Just check that.
I'm seeing it as well, Nicola, that the PowerPoint should be enlarged. Let me see if I can do anything about that.
Great, thank you, Anna.
That just zooms it in, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We can share the PowerPoint after, which would hopefully resolve that.
I think that might be the best solution. I can't off the top of my head find a way of zooming in at the moment. I'm sorry, Jacobina.
Sorry. Okay, sorry, I just, yeah, no, so we were just finishing up there on the open access alternatives. And so if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So far we've looked at authentication and redirection. So wherever the patron starts the journey, we have enabled them to authenticate and then redirected them to licensed content or alternative open access content. With this last example here, we're actually looking at communication. So our assist function enables the library to insert messages to their patrons at the point of need. So here you can see that the University of Johannesburg have taken the opportunity to flag the availability of Lean Library to their users. So point of need messaging there. And they've chosen to raise awareness of Lean Library on their popular LibGuides page. So, but this is just one example of how Lean Library Access, the assist message within Lean Library Access works. There's lots of other use cases. So, for example, it could be used to garner feedback on specific resources by linking through to a feedback form. You could notify patrons that there's a problem with a particular resource on a particular day. So you could just say, we're aware that this site is down, we're working on it. Just so your patrons know and don't all feel like they need to inundate you, letting you know that there's a problem. You could also provide username and password details for those less traditional academic subscriptions. So perhaps to newspaper subscriptions ones that you might have access to. So there's lots of, and that's just a few, actually, there's loads of examples of how the assist message can be used. And we've really enjoyed working with the University of Johannesburg. We'd like to thank them for being such fabulous partners. And we'd also just like to share this quote, which shows how our partnership is developing and how the University of Johannesburg have appreciated the benefits that Lean Library has brought to its users. Let's give you a second or two to read through that quote there. And then finally, I just wanted to share some information on Lean Library's product portfolio. I'm not going to go into it in a great amount of detail. Today, we've been focusing on Lean Library Access, and that's the integration we have with the University of Johannesburg. But in addition to that solution, we have now expanded our offering, and we have two new products, Workflow for LibGuides and Lean Library Futures. These two products offer additional features that bring other aspects of the library into the patron's workflow. So we're trying to go that step further. We're bringing things like your LibGuide, your discovery service, and selected content into your user's workflow. So rather than having to access these through the library portal, we can actually surface the services on relevant sites so that we can bring the discovery service search results onto Google Scholar, for example, or we can bring the LibGuide for a particular publisher onto that publisher's website. So as I said, we're not focusing on the other products today, but if you are interested and would like any further information, then please do get in touch. And so now that's it in terms of our presentation for today, but we are very happy to take questions.
I see that there's a question, how easy Google and Google Scholar, so you can see how easy Google and Google Scholar is, but how about the resources that the library subscribe to? If users are left to freely access Google and there will be no value for money in terms of resources that they subscribe to, so how could we integrate all these resources together without losing money? Do you want to address that, or can I share our experience?
Oh, please go ahead and share your experience, Janina, and then we can add to it.
Yeah, from our side, it had a lot to do with the setup. So when you start using Lean Library or subscribe to Lean Library, you have to do a setup, and it will only refer your users authenticate via authentication to the resources you already have. So there's no additional cost because they access the resources you're already subscribing to. They're not accessing additional resources. So from our side, there's no cost implication.
Great, thank you, Janina. So I think, gosh, the questions are, oh, it disappeared. It's disappeared from the Q&A, I'm sorry. But I think the idea of Lean Library as well is that we are always trying to surface the library's content. That is the first port of call. I mean, libraries can select whether they want their library holdings to be surfaced first or open access. So we are sort of trying to support that way by making sure that the students and users are directed to the library at every given opportunity. And so the next question is you have the university logo there, which is from Hazel. Thank you, Hazel. You have the university logo there on Google Scholar for the University of Johannesburg, but no mention of the library. One of our issues is that students often don't realise it's the library who is providing access. Can these logo messages be customised so that the word library is included? Absolutely. Everything is fully customisable. So Janina and her team have chosen to have the University of Johannesburg logo there. In the wording though, it usually does say your library has, so that it is reminding, but you can, if you wanted to have your library's logo there, but the wording, you can customize those messages and say whatever you want. So below the logo, there's a text box that you can just put in, and you can always say that the information is coming from the library. So fully customizable, and you can style the messages and the colors and the logo as you see fit. So I hope that answers that question, Hazel. What does it take to, Florence, thank you, Florence, has asked, what does it take to integrate the library portal to Google Scholar? When we do the integration, you just need to provide your Google Scholar ID to us, and then we input that and integrate away. So that's all we need.
I see there's also a question about open source and predatory journals, but I think you've touched on that already, Nicola, when you said that it only alerts a student if it's a reputable open source item. So there's a little pop-up box that comes up to say that you've accessed or you retrieved an open source item, and as I said, it's only reputable open access sources that you have that pop-up for.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And of course, any articles, journals, databases that you subscribe to at the library will of course always be reputable, and that is the pop-up only appears if there is content to redirect to as well. But we do use reputable sources with core and unpaywall. Just as an aside, as a feature that we're developing in our futures product going live in a few months is something that we're calling Library Insights, and there is actually the facility to highlight if articles and journals are predatory. So that's something that could be managed by the library. So if you become aware of them and you just wanted to put flags that link through to any search results that show them, then you would be able to do that. Okay. Oh yeah, that's the predatory journals. So 2 questions from Karen. I found the idea not to assume our patrons know that we know what we know, do not think like us, do not work according to our professional workflow, and wondered what Lean Library learned about library patrons in terms of their workflow and approach being different from the librarian or the database providers. So I think, do you mean what, sorry Karen, do you mean what did we find in our research there? I mean, I think yes, that's what I thought. Thank you, Tara. So I think what we found in our research about workflows is that many students and researchers are quite unique in the way they all have their preferred workflows, they all have their go-to sites. So for example, as we've seen and mentioned quite a few times today, a lot of people go to Google Scholar or go to Google. A phenomenal amount do go to Wikipedia as well, really, as a percentage. And so I think many librarians approach it in different ways, but I think really what is at the heart of what everyone wants to do and what we really drew from the report is that librarians just want to make sure that regardless of how patrons research and regardless of what their workflow is, they want to make sure they're able to access the content that's available to them and support them in that journey. And so that's why we look at the different ways and different tools that we can use to sort of enhance that journey and bring more information into the patron's workflow and more services into the patron's workflow, so that we're constantly cementing that librarian and patron stroke researcher relationship. And then I think the second question from Karen is for you, Janina. So how does the University of Johannesburg manage the live chat at the point of need? Is it staffed 24/7 all year round? Any anecdotes on the chat service?
At this stage, we still refer them to the chatbot, so we do not have someone, that's available 24/7. And our chatbot is also linked to the university chatbot, so that's how we do it at the moment.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for those questions, Karen. I hope great, thank you, Karen. And then Faith. Absolutely, Faith, that is a very good synopsis. I'll read out in case everyone can't see. In essence, Lean Library helps direct users to content that you're subscribing to by indicating that the library subscribes to the article that the user has found on Google, which is exactly what we've been demonstrating today. So thank you, Faith, for that very concise summary for us.
Yeah, that's actually my colleague Faith. So Faith, thank you so much for answering that one. I'm also very surprised to see that we have a former UJ student who's now a reference librarian at Namibia.
I saw that as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So the system app, there's a question here that I'd missed, sorry, from Jacobina, about which system application do you use when creating LibGuides? If possible, please indicate how it's functioning, e.g. is it accessible, searchable off campus? So is that a question for Janina on how she creates her own LibGuides, or is that a question on workflow for LibGuides? So maybe we both answer and then we'll cover all the bases. So I think from Lean Library's point of view, we do now have an integration, an integration with LibGuides. This enables the LibGuide to be surfaced through an iframe editor on the selected URLs and domain links that the library wants to surface the LibGuides. They don't have to be LibGuides. If you have other training materials, they can be put into the iframe editor, and through the workflow for LibGuides technology, yes, on or off campus, they can be surfaced at that point of need. In fact, I'll just give you a really encouraging statistic about how helpful that can be, because obviously libraries put in a huge amount of time and effort into producing LibGuides. The Cardiff University, less than 6 months ago, did workflow for LibGuides and put a LibGuide for Google Scholar on to appear, and it's been viewed over 16,000 times in that short period of time. So I think that is a fantastic statistic and shows just how great it is when you can surface things on and off campus. And then Janina.
Okay, I know one part of the question that you asked. I can't remember which system we are using for the LibGuides. To be honest, what I do know is, yes, you can access them off campus, but unfortunately I forgot which system we currently subscribe to. I don't know if Faith is still online and if she can maybe just put it in the chat box. Maybe she remembers.
Thank you. And then we have a question here from an anonymous attendee. How does Lean Library handle non-version records from unpaywall? Now, I am sorry to say that I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, but I am very happy to go away, and we do send out follow-ups from the webinar, and so I can put the answer to that question in. So if you, I'm sorry because I can't see your name because you're anonymous, but if you registered to receive the follow-up from the webinar, we can definitely add an answer in there for you. So I'm terribly sorry that I can't answer that at this moment, but we will get an answer and we will share it with everyone who's attended today. And I'm so sorry if everyone just heard my doorbell ring. I'm so sorry that that happened in the background. Are there any more questions? I think that might be.
I'm sorry, I just remembered. We use SpringShare.
Yes.
We use SpringShare for LibGuides. I think it's the one that's most often used.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Oh, I didn't make that connection to that question either, but yes, of course, SpringShare. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I mean, if you do have any more questions, then please feel free to just contact us after, and we'd be happy to help with any of the questions we can. We will share that response in our follow-up about unpaywall. But I think I would just like to say a huge thanks to Janina for joining us today. It was a fabulous presentation, very thought-provoking, so thank you very much. And huge thanks to Anna too for joining and sharing our futures results. I hope you've all found that really helpful. It's good to have seen so many of you here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye.